for joining us. Ah, there we go, and there's our recording. So thank you all for joining us for our 2025 virtual series, Tell Me More: Modern Approaches to Psychotherapy. Tonight, we are honored to have Janae Hanson with us to talk about healing-centered services. Um, Janae Hanson, she obtained her bachelor's degree from Buena Vista College in Storm Lake, Iowa, and her master's degree in social work from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. She's been with the SIU School of Medicine for 14 years and is currently the executive director of the Survivor Recovery Center. She also used to work in the Department of Psychiatry with me, and you know, we lost her when she took over the Survivor Recovery Center, which has been an amazing resource to have in the Springfield area. She is active in the day-to-day operations of the center, of course, as well as providing therapy to trauma survivors. She began her career working with those who had experienced domestic violence or sexual assault, later overseeing programming for those facing domestic violence and substance abuse. Her other professional interests include creating trauma-informed communities of care and teaching the next generation of therapists. Um, Please feel free. So we're going to hold questions till the end because there's a lot of content to cover. If you think of a question, though, feel free to go ahead and drop it in the chat. Or if you want to save it for the end of the presentation, we'll take questions at that point. Otherwise, thank you so much, Janae. And yes, tell us all about trauma-informed care.
Sure. Thank you so much, Joy. I'm so glad to be here. And did we get the screens swapped out okay? Everything looks good for seeing slides?
Yeah, we've got, it is in the presenter mode where you can kind of see the next upcoming slide. So I don't know if you wanted the traditional slideshow mode.
Is that better?
Um, I
It
don't
switched
think
on my
it's,
screens. I've got two screens and it's swapped, but it,
oh, if you've got two screens, it may be sharing the wrong screen. You can always stop sharing and then try resharing.
we'll just keep going.
Okay.
If it's not bothering any of you, it's not going to bother me. We'll just move along. So thank you so much for having me and for having the interest in trauma-informed care, healing-centered services. So I want to address that idea first as we get started here, because there is kind of movement afoot within the trauma-informed care world that verbiage may kind of start to change. You may hear these things used interchangeably, from trauma-informed care to healing-centered services. And it kind of comes from a place of some groups want to take the emphasis off that word trauma and focus it more on the concept of healing. And so that's why you'll hear them used interchangeably, or you may hear one sect who is really using one over the other. So that's where that comes from. But we start here with a quote. I don't know how many of you may be familiar with Dr. Bruce Perry. He is a child and adolescent psychiatrist. We are great fans here at the Survivor Recovery Center of his work. We use this book in particular, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, as some of our onboarding material. It's stuff we use as we get learners who come through here. So it's a great resource. But it just really brings our attention to the idea that relationships can be like so many things. They can either be incredibly harmful and hurtful and even terrorizing at times, or we can use those relationships to help heal each other. And that's really what we're about here. So this training is not a SAMHSA training, but it is aligned with the SAMHSA trauma-informed care curriculum. Just wanted to let folks know that. While we are not using any kind of very graphic material, there's no graphic pictures, there's no graphic stories that are shared. Just the simple fact that we're talking about trauma can be activating and triggering for some people. So I just really encourage self-care. If you need to step away, absolutely do that. Take care of yourselves throughout the rest of the evening, and know that my resources are here if you need anything and I can be of help. Don't hesitate to reach out. We use material from a lot of different sources, and those resources are on the last several slides of this presentation. And so I've shared that with Kristen, that it's more than okay for those slides to be sent out to folks if for no other reason than you want access to those resources. So with all that, we will move into material. We use a fair number of quotes. There's lots of folks that we like. Judith Lewis Herman is absolutely one of those. And again, if you are not familiar with Ms. Herman, she is kind of the godmother, so to speak, of the trauma-informed care, trauma awareness movement. And she shares with us in her book, Trauma and Recovery, which again is another one I highly recommend. But she shares that after a traumatic experience, the human system of self-preservation seems to go on permanent alert, as if the danger might return at any moment. And so that's an important concept for all of us to keep in mind, and to kind of tuck away. And we'll come back to that concept here in a little while, but it's just really important to keep that at the as a little snippet, that once somebody has been traumatized, that sensitivity is just incredibly heightened. Somebody else we really like here is Resmaa Menakem. Resmaa is a therapist and a healer and an author, and shares with us that when something happens to the body that it's too much, it's too fast, or it's too soon, and then we don't have safety or regard, it overwhelms the body and it can create trauma. So one of the kind of concepts, the things that I want to point out, is this concept of being overwhelmed. That's what really kind of delineates and sets trauma apart from something that maybe is upsetting. It has disturbed us. It has bothered us. But when we become overwhelmed and cannot accurately, safely process what's happened, that's when it becomes traumatic. But it's also why something is traumatic for me and maybe not for you, or vice versa, because we come from different baselines, we come from different environments, we come from different support systems. And so something that may really kind of overwhelm my system, my brain, my body. And that may be because I come from a history of trauma, and so my threshold is different. It may be that I don't have a community of supportive, caring individuals, or communities to be involved in, church communities, work communities, places of support. And so that impacts my ability to kind of be able to move through an experience. And so we don't get to necessarily judge and decide what is traumatic for somebody, because it's going to be different for all of us. So, signs and symptoms of trauma. Some of these, I think, are very straightforward. Some of these are things that show up on our PTSD checklists, or a PCLC screening that we might be doing with somebody. If you asked an individual, maybe what are some signs or symptoms of a traumatic event and somebody having been traumatized, we often hear responses like nightmares, flashbacks, intrusive memories, increased startle response, increased anxiety. Those come to mind pretty quickly and pretty easily. Some of these others may not have necessarily shown up on our radar as a trauma response. So chronic pain, headaches, decreased concentration, which could be related to the insomnia that's also on this list. Now, this is not all inclusive, but it's just meant to kind of help us to recognize that any number of things could be potentially linked back to a history of trauma. When I look at chronic pain and headaches, I think about a patient I worked with a number of years ago who, during his intake, this was while I was in the Department of Psychiatry, during his initial appointment and asking him what brought him in, he said, well, I've been treated for headaches for years and my neurologist can't find anything wrong with me. So he tells me it's all in my head and I need to see you. And just being able to take somebody like that and create an element of trust and start thinking about working through, is there a trauma background and is this your body's way of trying to deal with that overwhelm? One of the other things that I just want to take a minute and point out, little or no memories. That often catches people off guard as a symptom of trauma, because so many people think, well, when there's been a traumatic experience, all of those details are just etched in our memory. And for some, they are. For others, there kind of becomes this blank spot, or it's maybe not blank, but it's only not blank because somebody has filled that in for us. They've told us what's happened. But it's not at all uncommon, because the body is so focused on getting through the experience, trying to either be or get safe, that those memories are not necessarily getting filed away in a manner that allows us to easily and quickly recall them, which is also a protective mechanism. And so because somebody can't remember it doesn't mean it wasn't traumatic. That may actually be an indicator of how traumatic it was. So there's often a dose-response relationship between the trauma and the negative impact of the trauma. But that's only often, it isn't always. So when we think about something significant, right, that impacts communities or nations, I'm thinking about mass shootings, I'm thinking about terrorist attacks, I'm thinking about 9/11. Those kinds of things are significant, that just really turn entire communities and entire nations kind of upside down. And so those, often people may have one trauma, but it was so significant that there are large number of negative side effects from that. In other situations, it's often the more intense, the more frequent the trauma, the more we will see the impact of negative effects. So individuals who are living in abusive homes, whether that's domestic violence or child abuse, human trafficking kinds of situations, individuals who live in neighborhoods where there is repeated violence and threats of violence. In those situations, we often see higher numbers of negative effects, as well as more intense negative effects, because of just that repeated exposure and sometimes little to no time of feeling like they're really in a safe kind of situation and environment. I'm sure that all of you are very familiar with this polyvagal chart, but just kind of as reminders, hopefully all of us are kind of hanging out right now down here in that little green area, social engagement. We feel good, we feel relaxed, we can pay attention, we can take in the stimulus that's kind of coming at us, maybe from various locations. We feel calm. We are maybe operating from a place of curiosity. We're formulating some questions or some ideas based on things we're hearing. This is the space that feels good. Something happens. We hear a loud noise. We hear somebody screaming. We hear sirens. Any number of things that could trigger us, activate us, and we may start to move up into that yellow section, right? That section where we're starting to recognize that we are either going to have to fight or flee. And as that intensifies, we may even move into a space of we're not consciously making the decision of whether or not we are going to fight or flee, but our brains are making that for us. We're getting the adrenaline dumps, so that we are prepared to fight or to flee. And our bodies, our brains are making those decisions not only on the information that we're taking in the moment, we're also making those decisions, again, on a subconscious level, but based on our history. So if we've been in a similar situation and we fought and it worked, we're more likely to fight in this situation. If we've been in similar situations and it seemed better for us to flee, then we may resort to fleeing as well in this situation. So either way, our focus is starting to narrow, our blood pressure and heart rates are increasing. And like I said, we're getting kind of that cortisol and adrenaline dump, so that we're prepared to do whatever we think we need to do. But we're still in that state of I can do something. Now we may, depending on, again, history and situation, we may move on up into that I can't stage where we freeze. We become quite literally immobile. And some of that, again, is kind of based on our history. Have we tried to fight or flee in the past and it didn't work? And so we've subconsciously decided that freezing is really the better option for us. We often start to shut down. We may feel hopeless and helpless. Our body systems kind of start to shut down as well. We're conserving some energy. And it's a really it's a very scary place to be. And we see individuals move into this freeze space, especially in situations where there is repeated exposure to violence or trauma. So domestic violence, child abuse, that human trafficking, like I've referenced earlier, so that they've kind of learned that neither fighting nor fleeing has worked and maybe has actually been more dangerous. And so they move into that freeze space. I'm not going to show this during this presentation, but I just want to reference this YouTube video. It's about 2.5 minutes long. I encourage you, if you've not seen it, to take just a couple minutes and check it out. It is a reminder of what empathy is and what it is not. It really is able to address empathy versus sympathy, and sympathy coming from this place of at least, right? It uses examples in there of at least, if somebody says, I think I'm going to go through a divorce. Well, at least you had a marriage and you had some happiness for a while, at least. And empathy is much more, I recognize you're in this hole. I recognize you're scared, you're alone, you don't know what you're going to do. And I'm going to climb down in this hole and sit with you and be with you. And it requires us to be able to kind of identify those same kinds of emotions and feelings and experiences in our own lives so that we can connect to somebody else. It's a great teaching tool if any of you work with learners in psychiatry residency programs or other residency programs, individuals who are learning to be therapists or counselors, any kind of helping profession. I think it's a great resource. If you've not watched it, I highly recommend it. So how do we use trauma-informed or healing-centered services when we're working with individuals? And we know that in the world of mental health, that there are a lot of times that we are dealing with, interacting with individuals who may be escalating for any number of reasons. And so how do we approach those situations, like I said, in a trauma-informed or healing-centered kind of way? So in the beginnings of those situations, as we identify that somebody is starting to escalate, The empathy we want to draw on encourages us to just listen actively to what they're telling you. If you can take a few minutes and reflect some of that back to them in an effort to let them know that you are hearing them and you are understanding them. And we find that a lot of times in these situations where somebody has escalated, that's a lot of what they want. They want to be heard, they want to be acknowledged. And so we just really want to be very intentional in our interactions with them. Be very authentic. If you have been brought into a situation, you want to introduce yourself and your role. You want to let them know who you are and why you've brought in. Are you the supervisor of a clinic? Are you an attending physician? What's your role, so that they can understand that this isn't just somebody else who maybe was walking by and was curious, wanted to get in on the drama, but somebody who really can have a role in trying to help the situation. Remember that we want one person to approach and speak at a time. If there are multiple individuals involved in this situation, we want to be very conscious of one person kind of taking the lead at a time. And remember, you need to be able to self-regulate. A lot of times what we find in these situations is they have created anxiety in us. And so when we get anxious, we may be holding our breath. And that's not good for us. It's not helping our bodies to be able to regulate. So we want to continue to take very low, slow, deep breaths as we're moving through the situation. Now, sometimes that is not enough and people continue to escalate, or we've come in the midst of somebody who has already escalated. And we need to kind of try and be able to handle the situation or help handle those situations. So the empathy in this space is, don't argue with somebody. Accept their beliefs and what they're telling you about the situation at face value, even if you know that what they're telling you is untrue or it's irrational. We need to remember that our perception is our reality. And I like to think about a day like today, right? I'm here in Springfield, Central Illinois. It was absolutely frigid this morning when I came into the office. It was, I think, a feels like temperature of -7. I'm not a winter girl. I am always cold. And so that was atrocious to me. That was my belief. That's how I felt about it. It was my reality. I have people in my life who I swear are part polar bear. They love the winter. They love the snow. They love the cold. And so they would have approached today in a much happier frame of mind. The sun was shining, the roads were clear, it was brisk outside, it was a beautiful day. That's their reality. That's the place they come from. It seems irrational to me, but to them, it's not. And so we just need to, in the moment, accept people where they are. Be very authentic with individuals. And this is just good healing-centered care, no matter the situation. When you don't know something, you want to tell them that. They ask a question and you don't have the answer, simply saying, you know what, that's a great question. I don't have the answer, but I am going to find it out for you and I will let you know. I will call you by tomorrow. I will let me step out and get the answer. I'll be right back as soon as I can get that information. Or, great question. I don't know. Let's sit down and see if we can figure that out together. Because they will know, they will figure it out if you have lied to them, and then you will lose all credibility. And if you are a treating physician, you don't want to lose that credibility, because then the treatment plan kind of goes out the window. Remember, in terms of calming energy, speaking slowly, speaking clearly, We don't want to, when they have escalated, they've brought their volume way up. We don't want to match that volume, because then they'll just take it up another notch to be sure they're being heard. And then we kind of get into this stair step kind of experience, and we don't want or need that. What we find is if we can speak slowly, speak clearly, keep a conversational volume, a lot of times that will bring them down. They will come down to match us instead of us coming up to match them. And it's just, it's kind to not ask too many questions all at once. Even in situations where I'm not feeling anxious, if somebody throws a lot of questions at me, I'm going to start to feel anxious. And then all kinds of other emotions can get triggered. So ask questions one at a time. And I get it. Sometimes we want to throw 3 or 4 questions at them at a time because we're afraid we'll forget. But it will often do more harm than good to just ask kind of fire questions at them quickly like that. And then in terms of that self-regulation, keep breathing, those slow, deep breaths, keep doing that. And now also keep in mind, this 9 times out of 10 is not about you. This is about an unmet need. And if we can use these other skills, our empathy, our calming energy, our being very slow and deliberate and thoughtful, and try and figure out what that unmet need is, we will do wonders for de-escalating a situation. And so just, it's not about me. It's not about me. And I have even said that to individuals at times. I have said, I understand that you are really angry, and I understand why you're really angry, but I don't think you're really angry at me. So can we work together to kind of try and figure out a solution? And a lot of times that also helps. They're like, oh, wait, yeah, I'm not mad at you. I am really mad at this situation, but I'm not mad at you. Then after the situation has de-escalated, if you are still involved and engrossed with them, talking with them, you continue to believe them still, even if those what the things that they're saying don't necessarily ring true for you, that's okay. We're meeting them where they are. We know that in the field of healthcare, and especially mental health care, there is always paperwork to be done, right? And so if there has been a situation in which there was a pretty significant escalation in interaction, a lot of times we're going to have to document that. We've already talked about that if there has been some level of trauma involved, that memory can get a little foggy, a little fuzzy. So if you can, take a few minutes and just jot down the facts. Write things down. I'm not encouraging you necessarily to sit down and do the full-blown charting at that point, but just what happened here. In an ideal situation, you're going to avoid working with other patients or getting deeply involved with coworkers until you've had a few minutes to kind of calm yourself. And in that self-regulation, kind of taking it to that next level. If possible, you decompress, and if you can, you leave that workspace for a little while. If you can step out and walk around the block. Do you have enough time to go grab a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, a glass of water? Something to just give you those few minutes. I encourage workspaces to think about what this could look like. So that you can kind of have some plans in place. And I've found that a lot of times, if you need that few minutes, even being able to say to the next patient you're supposed to see, we need just about 10 minutes and then we'll be right with you. As long as you've acknowledged them, a lot of times they're like, okay, I get it. And you're going to be a better physician, a better practitioner when you walk in that room if you've given yourself that little bit of downtime. So a few things, again, in any kind of setting that is trauma informed, it is healing centered, and that is coming back to that tone of voice, keeping it very conversational in terms of rate, rhythm, and volume. If you can, you want to provide choice on where somebody's going to sit or stand when you're interacting with them. There are a couple of schools of thought. I don't land firmly in either camp. I believe that practitioners really get to know their patients and can kind of make choices based on those relationships and what they know about patients. Because sometimes it's better to let the patient have the space that's closest to the door. Because if they have a trauma background, you may not want to be in a situation with them where they feel trapped, where they feel like they can't get out quickly. There will be other situations in which you feel like maybe you do need to be closest to the door. So I don't think that we can make a broad brushstroke statement about which way that should be. You kind of need to take that on a case by case or patient by patient basis. If at all possible, you always want to approach people from the front. We've acknowledged that oftentimes when there is a trauma background, there is an increased startle response. There is hypervigilance. And so approaching somebody from the back can be very activating for them. So approach from the front. If you have to approach from the front, don't ever walk up behind somebody and just touch them on their shoulder or put your hand on their back or anything like that, because that's very activating for most people. So approach them in a very conversational manner, say their name as you're approaching them to be able to catch their attention. And then be very aware of your body stature. Some of you may be taller, maybe bigger, broader shouldered. Some of you may be smaller, but be thinking about your size in relation to their size and your body position in relation to theirs. If they're sitting, you don't want to be standing over them if you don't have to be. That can be very unnerving for almost anybody, but especially folks that have some of that trauma background. I've been known, I have one individual that I've been working with for a long time. She has come into my office at times and laid on my floor. I've not laid on the floor next to her, but I have gotten down on the floor and sat with her, just to kind of try and be on her level and not having a place of dominance over her. So trauma-informed care in a nutshell, I think, can kind of be summed up from, we want to come from what's wrong with you and how do we fix it, which I understand for people in the medical field is a lot of the training, right? You're taught to ask what's wrong with this person and how do I fix it? That's what you've been tasked and charged with. But it is obviously can be very pathologizing, and we don't think of trauma as pathology. So we kind of try and switch that thinking to what happened to you and how do we help you heal? And that allows us to kind of draw on some of that empathy, right? When I switch my thinking from what is wrong with you to, wow, what happened to you? It changes my outlook on somebody. It changes how I approach them. The other piece about this is if you've gone from and how do I fix it to how do we help you heal? If you have to be fixed, that means you're broken. If you're going to be healed, it means you've been injured. Somebody else has done something to you. And the we indicates that we're in this together. We are a team and we'll work together to try and figure this out. So trauma is about a lack of control, right? When something traumatic happens to us, all of our control has been taken away. So a very trauma-informed, healing-centered approach is how can you provide people with choice? And this can be done even in situations in which it is a med management appointment. So a lot of times, especially early on in relationships or with a new diagnosis, new circumstances, there's medication changes. And I know that a lot of times that also includes, we could do this medication or that medication. We could do this medication and we could start at this dose, or we could start at that dose. And bringing the individuals in on those discussions and those choices helps them to feel like they are a part of this process and that they are getting some of their autonomy back. We can also do it with appointments. As long as you have more than one clinic time, and I know especially those of you who are in academic medicine, you may only have one clinic time, but if you've got more than one, so do you prefer a Tuesday morning or a Thursday afternoon? If you only have one, you can still hopefully ask, do you want an early appointment or a late appointment? Just really bringing them in on those decisions. When you've got multiple things that need to be done, where do they want to start? Do they want to make adjustments to their antidepressant, or do they feel like they need to add the prazosin in and leave the antidepressant alone for now? But allowing them to be a part of that kind of treatment planning is just hugely beneficial, not only in just being trauma informed and healing centered, but in relationship and rapport building as well. So 3 key things in terms of responding when individuals share with you that there has been a traumatic experience for them, whether this is recent, it happened just before they came in to see you, or they're sharing something from 30 years ago. Being able to say to them, I'm sorry this happened to you. You don't deserve, or you didn't deserve to be treated this way. And that may be the first time that they're hearing those kinds of statements. And then, how can I help? And they may not have an answer to that, and that's okay. But coming back to that idea of choice, we don't want to assume that we know what's best for them or what they want to address first. So just simply saying, how can I help? And when they say, I don't know, you can say, do you want us to talk about that? And you can then reflect back to them the things that you've heard them say during the appointment about, maybe there's some food insecurities and kids aren't going to school and there's still violence in the home and there's a lack of adequate housing. So here are the things. Where do you think you want to start? What's most important? And you don't have to necessarily have the answer, but if you have resources you can give them, even if that resource is, I don't have all those answers, but I know somebody who does, and you help get them in connection, put them in connection to a case manager, a therapist, another program in your community. So a few key takeaways. We all know in the world of healthcare what universal precautions are, right? The gloves, the goggles, the masks, the gowns, the whole deal. In the world of trauma-informed care or healing-centered services, we operate from a universal assumption of trauma. And the idea behind that is that if you assume trauma and you use trauma-informed ways of interacting with someone, and there is no trauma, you've done no harm. If you make some assumptions based on gender, based on ethnicity, based on socioeconomic status, that there is no trauma at all, and you treat them as such, but there is trauma, you can actually do some harm. So always just assume trauma. Remember that trauma is the underlying and root cause for many medical and psychiatric conditions. That gentleman that had the headaches that nobody could figure out, right? There was no medical thing. They couldn't figure out something that was causing those. But trauma can be at the root. If you're feel like you're running into a brick wall and they're not making progress in their treatment planning, no matter what you do with them, have you explored the idea, at least for yourself, that there's a possibility of a traumatic background, and how do you start that discussion with them? Remember that individuals who come from especially a background where there's been repeated trauma, they have survived by learning how to read the individuals in their lives. the slightest nuances, the shift of the eyes, the eye rolls, the way we hold our bodies, the tones of our voice, all of that. They are reading that and are usually doing it almost perfectly. And that means they can sense when we are fearful of them, when we are disgusted and irritated by them, when we're not believing what they're telling us. But the reverse of that is true as well. They also can feel our authentic selves when we are trying to really connect with them and being respectful, when we are believing them, when we are admiring their ability to have been as resilient as they have been. Which then leads to, there is always something we can find to praise about somebody. Some level of strength. Something has made them survive, and something has gotten them to the point of asking for help. And we need to acknowledge that. And I have been known also to say to patients, you know what? If I were living in a war zone, I probably would have used some alcohol and marijuana too. I am so glad that you are safe with me now and that you shared this with me. And let's work together to find something else that is healthier and will keep you safe. And so even being able to kind of build upon it like that. So I want to take just a few minutes. I know we can have people from all over joining us, but I do want to tell you just a little bit about our program here so that you have a little bit of an understanding of how we're putting things into practice. So we are a grant-funded program that is affiliated with the School of Medicine. We are actually under the family medicine umbrella here. And we work with individuals who are residents of Sangamon County and have experienced interpersonal violent crime within the last 3 years. And we do work with kiddos as young as 5, then all the way up through the lifespan. We've worked with individuals. I think the oldest we've had has been in their early 80s. We do offer individual and group therapy. We do have 2 psychiatrists who work with our population. They're here on site with us, each of them a half day per week, and clinical case management. And then we also offer trauma-informed yoga, which has been really, really popular for our folks. We are one of 50, I think there are 54 trauma recovery centers now. And we all follow a trauma recovery center model that was developed out of the University of California, San Francisco. There are other locations here, other trauma recovery centers here in the state of Illinois that also follow that model. And they are in Peoria, Rockford, the city of Chicago, and Lake County. Just a couple little things about what makes us different. We have 4, well, I'll say 4.5 therapists, because I do offer some level of clinical services, not as much as the director, but some. And all of them are trained in various evidence-based therapy modalities for treating trauma, including everybody here being EMDR certified. We offer assertive outreach. So when our folks drop off, when they don't show up for appointments, we are reaching out to them and trying to help them troubleshoot anything that might be getting in the way, any barriers for them getting into services. Location, location, location. What I mean by that is, because we're grant funded, all of our services are free of charge. And so because they're free of charge, we're not tied to a location, because we haven't had to go through the whole getting paneled with all the various insurance companies. So we can go out and meet people. We can go out into the communities and meet them. If it is a safe location, we will meet them there. Schools, shelters, their homes, churches, we've gone to all of those locations. And staff wellness is a huge priority for us. Our therapists carry, relatively speaking, smaller caseloads than a lot of other therapists in traditional settings. And that's not only for their own well-being and staff wellness, but because they also have to do that assertive outreach and a lot of clinical case management. If you are in the Sangamon County area or have patients who are in the Sangamon County area, this is how you can get a hold of us. It's also how you can get a hold of me. That's our front desk phone number. And I'm happy to answer any questions or address anything that anybody has. Feel free to give me a call. So I will turn it over to any questions we might have or comments this evening.